Grazie per l'invito, è un
Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here with you, and for many reasons. First of all, for the beauty of this conference, the cultural wealth of this meeting, of this conference. And I would like to say that it's great to be here to honor the memory of Umberto Veronesi. Let me say a couple of things. Umberto Veronesi has changed my life on 3 different occasions. First of all, in April 1978, after he had been in the operational theater for 5 years, he had a meeting with me to discuss my possible job. He ate 2 yogurts and an apple, but he gave the apple to me, and we discussed over that kind of lunch. And he asked me, "Are you sure you want to search for the causes of tumors?" Yes, he was very worried. At the end of the apple, he told me, "Yes, you can start on Monday." That was the first time he changed my life. Then, at a certain time, I was offered the possibility of studying or traveling to the USA to study. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. And Umberto Veronesi helped me, and the result is that I was given a grant. I went to the USA and then came back. The third was his unlimited support for the setting up of the EPIC project. Umberto was one of the members of the expert group of Europe Against Cancer initiative, and he was a great supporter with an incredible vision. And he fought to convince the European Union to make this leap in the void and to finance a study on 500,000 people for 20 years. It really takes the vision that Umberto had to succeed in that. Let's get into the presentation. You're going to see this slide on 7 occasions, 6 times. I put it here to give an outline and to give a framework to the presentation, because I will try to chain together, to link together some different topics. Addressing the young people in the hall, I would like to give you bird's eye view of the incidence of cancer in the world today. Every year, about 14.5 million new cancer cases are diagnosed in the world. The overall figure will double, is destined to double. Even if the risk factors remain what they are, this will double because of the population growth taking place in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Simply for the doubling or the growth of the population exceeding 50 years of age, the overall figure of cancers will double. The burden on health systems will be of great importance, will be substantial. Here I have selected the 15 more frequent tumors, and of course, in spite of all the efforts to fight against smoking, lung cancer remains the most frequent cancer in the world, with more than 4.5 cases in the world, because the decrease in the incidence of lung cancer in Europe and Northern America has been offset by the exportation of tobacco in the developing countries and the unscrupulous promotion of use of tobaccos in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. That is why the lords of tobaccos have offset their losses, increasing their sales elsewhere, jeopardizing many people. Then we have breast cancer ranking second. A girl who is born today in Europe, if we do nothing, has a 12% possibility of developing a breast cancer. 1 woman out of 9 will develop a breast cancer in Europe. Therapeutical and treatments have improved, but there is no progress made. There has not been any progress in prevention. There is no sign of, all over the world, there is no sign of a decrease in the incidence of breast cancer. Colorectal, the third, cancer, which until 30 years ago was seen in Europe and North America, and now it is seen also elsewhere because of a change in lifestyle. Then prostate, ranking fourth in terms of incidence, even though the mortality or morbidity is low because it can be treated, and the same applies to breast cancer. Then stomach cancer. In the 19th century, it was the most frequent kind of cancer. But then changes in the lifestyle, in the quality of food, and the reduction in the exposure to Helicobacter pylori in the young part, when people are young, has brought about this reduction. Then we have liver cancer, which is very frequent in the developing countries and which is linked to many different varying factors. Here it's linked to alcohol intake, to the hepatitis B and C viruses, but it's also linked to obesity. I will not mention liver cancer when we'll discuss EPIC, because we have published an article studying the healthy population, saying that obesity is the first factor of developing a cancer. It's the first risk factor for cancer in a healthy population. So obesity is connected to liver cancer and to cancer. Now, I would like to discuss now the fourth element which has changed my life, i.e. the extraordinary changes in the incidence rates most type of cancers in the different parts of the world. Here you can see lung cancer, and you can see the darker, the greater the incidence. Here it goes from 60, 70, 100 cases out of 100,000 inhabitants, and it goes down to 5, 10. There is a range of 20 times, and we know that lung cancer is connected directly to the exposure of tobacco smoking, tobacco habits. There is more cancer. There is a greater incidence where smoking was more important in the past, and here you can see the differences and the changes which have been recorded from country to country, but you can see that in certain areas of Africa and Latin America, the smoking is not very frequent, and we have to work so that this does not change. Breast cancer, here too we see very wide variations, and we also and here too we have explanations. For example, reproductive life changes in the diet, in exercise and obesity can explain these variations to a large extent. Colon cancer, colorectal cancer, follows the case of the breast cancer. We have similar figures to mean that Europeans migrating in the world have taken with them the risk to develop colorectal cancer or breast cancer. But it's not a genetic problem, it's a question of lifestyle and dietary changes. Now we have 3 or 4 cancer cases showing you the world upside down. Here you can see cancers which are much more frequent outside Europe than in Europe and the United States. The stomach cancer has a great incidence in Asia, Japan, China, and this is connected to a chronic infection due to Helicobacter pylori, which does not give many symptoms. The excessive use of salt, low availability of fruit and vegetables, low consumption of fruit and vegetables. And one of the lowest incidence in the world is in the UK and the United States. On the basis of historical data, if you criticize what is eaten or the diet in the UK and the United States, we have to admit that not everything is negative, since they have a very low incidence rate of stomach cancer. The world is not black and white. There are many different nuances. And here we have the cancer of the cervix. But I introduced this slide after having heard what Umberto Mantovani said, to say, yes, that we have 250,000 deaths per year due to cancer of the cervix. Vaccination is important, but it would be also important to vaccinate the high-risk populations. As you can see here, we have a very high incidence of cancer of the cervix in Latin America, Africa, and in some populations in Asia. The effort to vaccinate against the HPV is concentrated in the low incidence area. We are vaccinated more those who are less in need, and vice versa. So we have inequalities, and this is really a great inequality or great differences appearing at a global level. Then liver cancer. I just included women in this case because I would like to draw your attention to one aspect in women who traditionally, especially in these populations, have a low consumption uptake or intake. So liver cancer in these cases is connected with the high exposure to hepatitis B and C viruses. We have a vaccine against hepatitis B, which is highly effective. But once again, we are vaccinating in the light blue areas where the incidence rate is lower, and we are not vaccinating where the need is greater, in the dark area. Again, another example of inequalities. Then we do not have just differences at an international level, but we also had large variations over time. Why am I saying so? Because these changes and variations are the reason why we have tried to study nutrition and environmental factors, because if the incidence rate is homogeneous everywhere, one could say we are equal. But if we have a difference by 20 or 30 times in terms of incidence, then we must see what are the specific factors according to the incident rates. And then if we have the colorectal cancer incidence rates varying within a specific state. When I started to work, I had small slides, but I had a study performed by Sir Richard Doyle showing that Japan had the lowest incidence rates in colorectal cancer. And we had the only example of an industrialized society which, in spite of the fact of being industrialized with a high social and economic rate, had a low incidence. In 40 years, the situation has completely changed. In Japan, we have the highest incidence rates of colorectal cancer because of the changes in the diet, mainly. I would like to add something on the cancer of the cervix. These are mortality data, considering the United States from 1930, the end of the 1930s, to the 80s. Sorry, but the speaker is not speaking into a microphone, and we can't hear him. Sorry, we apologize. Here you have the uterus in the upper part, and you have the dotted line. Here it's back in 1930. Pap test is not in use yet. Screening is not in use. Vaccines are not available. The cervix cancer is the most frequent cancer in the USA, in China, Japan, everywhere. In between 1930 and 1960-70, we have a drop, a decrease in. Here you have the mortality rate, and here you have the uterus cancer in general terms, because it was difficult to understand the difference between the cervix and the endometrium. But the cervix is what is connected with the HPV. But here we have this drop if we divide the two things. Why has this been recorded? What is the reason for this drop? It's very simple. Hygiene, water and soap. This drop, this decrease is exclusively connected and linked with an improvement in the hygiene conditions. Men, who are the vector, started to have bathrooms and take showers. So they started to wash themselves, even before having sexual intercourses, for example. Indeed, something happened. The slides are changing without me touching them, or can you stop them, please? So in the 70s, a study completely changed the approach, and it was discovered that the first decisive factor for the risk of a woman to develop a cervix cancer was the number of sexual partners of her partner, of the husband. And that was the first test, the first evidence which supported the Avi Zurazen study. Just to say, here we see that Pap test started here, vaccine started here, but the real drop is brought about by the availability of water, soap, showers, and bathrooms. And this is the fundamental role played by the society and not by medicine in the primary prevention sector. What are the causes for cancer? What causes cancer? Well, we have spent decades trying to find an answer to the questions. First of all, we know that there is a large number of chemical carcinogens, the smoking of tobacco, but there is also compounds. We have asbestos, physical carcinogens. Asbestos is a natural substance. In Turkey, for example, we have epidemics of asbestos because they used to build houses with stones filled with asbestos. Then it was used at an industrial level. Then some viruses, some parasites. We didn't mention those. But the Egyptians had already pinpointed the role or the situation of those with blood present in the urinary tract, in the urine. We have these paintings with urine stained with blood, and this is connected with the presence of schistosoma, which leads to the development of cancer. Then ionizing radiation. So these are the factors. Has been shown that they have a very important role in a certain number of tumors, from lung, bladder, cervix, liver, nasopharynx, and so on and so forth. But we have a certain number of cancers for which 30 years of studies and research, 30 years of research, we performed experimental research studies in men, biomarkers, then we have never found a chemical or physical carcinogenic factor which could explain why these cancers are developed. Then we arrived at a certain idea by default, by excluding all the other things. Then we said, if it's not a chemical, physical, or biological carcinogenic factor leading to these cancers, is it possible that this cancer is developed because of a biological dysfunction which is not caused by an external element? So what could these factors be? These factors which lead to a deregulation, these regulators. And then we arrived to another idea. Well, maybe physical activity, the diet, foods and food components, the excessive and rapid growth from birth to the age of 15. I cannot enter into greater details, but we have published a certain number of studies which are reproduced, which are photocopies one of the other. For example, we know that the taller one is, the greater the cancer risks, but the lower the cardiovascular is. So you run more risks a greater risk to develop a cancer, but a lower risk to have a heart to develop and to have a heart disease. And the more we understand the mechanisms, the one who is taller, he has more growth factors, he has more stimuli to growth and reproduction of the tissue. And this is very bad if one has a clone of mutated cells, but it's fantastic for arteries who have to regenerate themselves. But in this case, it's a problem for some tumors or early sexual maturation. Women only with an early onset of menstruations, in those women, the breast cancer risk is double than in the other cases. But after that, it's too late. Little can be done at this point. So we had this hypothesis with a headache, really, because studying these things, do think about it. It's very difficult to study these things. We cannot just say, well, tell me, how many carrots did you eat when you were 15? Or how many carrots were you consuming? To go back in the life of people, in their history, in their intimate aspects, is very difficult anyway. And it's different studying these factors rather than asking precise questions. Did you work in a foundry or in a smelting factory when you were 30? Were you a welder when you were 40? And then we can start to study professional exposure cases. You know, in some cases, professional exposure is connected with the risk of developing cancer. But the other aspects, these aspects are very difficult to study because they are part of the personal life of these people. So in the 80s, 90s, it seems a long time back, the time of dinosaurs, really. But then we said we have to do something different, because up to that period, we had case control studies only. We took a group of people with cancer, 1,000 people with lung cancer, for example, and we would ask them some questions. For example, how many cigarettes did you smoke, or have you been smoking over the last 30 years? And we compared those data with another group of non-smokers, and we realized that those smoking more had more risk of developing a cancer. But if I were to ask these people, what did you eat 30 years ago? What did you do? It was too difficult. That is why we decided to follow the time sense, i.e. to start with people without cancer and to study their habits, their life habits and style, and to collect biological samples, and then little by little follow them. Of course, some will develop cancer, others will not. Some will develop a colon cancer. At first, you can see, for example, those who are obese and those who are lean. Over the years, we can see whether the obese people develop colon cancer more frequently than the others. This is a prospective cohort study. For the students who are present here, let me say that this is a contribution of Latin to epidemiology, because it's called cohort, because in Latin we had the cohorts, meaning the tactical structure of the Roman legion with 500 soldiers, but the experimented cohorts were closed cohorts. At a certain point, we had, for example, 350 soldiers, and they would remain just the same, decreasing in a decreasing number, but no one could be added to that. And they either died or retired, and they had no other choices. So it was closed, and this is a synonymous for a prospective studies, which follows a certain number of individuals without ever adding more individuals to that study. They can either die or disappear. We have been carrying out these studies for 20 years in EPIC. What is EPIC? In the 90s, when we started to collect data on the lifestyle and diets of these people, we measured the height, the circumferences, and then all the parameters to 500,000 people. We took their blood pressure twice. We collected all these data, and we also collected 30 milliliters of blood, and we really started to build EPIC with these cancer registers. For example, we have Lombardy, the province of Varese, and Turin in Piedmont. Then we had Florence and Ragusa. Then we added Naples, when there is no cancer register, but we had good possibilities of following the patients. So we started this for 10, 15 years, and at the end we could connect the onset of diseases with what was measured at the baseline, at the moment the study was started. In EPIC, we also have some questionnaires telling us who has changed his habits, who has quitted smoking, started smoking, or changed anything else. So we have also a register on the lifestyle. We had 500,000 of participants at the beginning. At the last follow-up last year, 90,000 of them had developed cancer, 25,000 had developed a myocardial infarction, 10,000 cases of brain ictus, brain stroke, and then we have a certain number of diseases to be studied in accordance with the characteristics detected at the beginning of this study. So really we invested a lot to create also a biological data bank. We have taken blood samples from more 400 participants, and we have created the first bank. We have 120 aliquots here. Here we have some of them in Lyon and some others in the other centers working with EPIC. So we have this huge blood collection and storage effort which was carried out. Why is that so? I submitted this idea to the Council for Research, to important and distinguished experts back in 1992. The reaction was negative because it said, first of all, you have no scientific hypothesis about what you're going to measure. No, I have my ideas, but I don't know what I'm going to measure, because in 20 years' time we're going to have things we don't have now. And the idea of setting aside DNA, they thought that was silly, because they told me DNA is of no use. In 1992, DNA was of no use, because back then we didn't have the new technologies to measure the changes within and the variations within the DNA. We decided anyway that the European Union was happy, the Veronesi supported us, and we collected 10 million of blood samples, and more than 1.5 million have already been used. And this is a gold mine that we are using to get the results and to collect the data. And this is the idea. You start from the baseline and you go to biomarkers of exposure to define how people live and what is the metabolic situation. Then we follow. We have the diagnosis of a disease, and we can also identify biomarkers predictive of the disease. Out of the many cancers we have studied, I'm going to choose the colorectal cancer as an example of what is integrated research, one epidemiology, populations, biochemistry, genetics, and omics are combined together. This research enabled us to identify 3 different areas through which the lifestyle has a biological impact. This is what we call open box epidemiology. It's not a statistical correlation, but it's rather going beyond the matching, the association, to understand the mechanism. You probably know the story of the yellow finger. When in the 60s, I was a boy back then, as I was young, there was a discussion whether smoking would cause lung cancer or not. An epidemiologist had an ironic idea. He said, well, we have many people walking around with a yellow finger because they smoke. It suffices to say that we can see who has a yellow finger and say that he is more at risk for developing cancer. So it's not that you smoke without a filter, but rather that smoking is turning your finger into a yellow finger, and therefore this is the cause for lung cancer. If we were to stop to the yellow finger, we would provide people with soap instead of looking for lung cancer cases. This is a statistical correlation. No, no longer. We now can understand the mechanisms because we do not work in a closed box. Here, this is just an example of how the diet, the lifestyle factors, the fact that one consumes a lot of red meat, or has a high consumption of fruit and vegetables, or is overweight, or doesn't exercise. These factors have a cascade, or bring about a cascade of factors which affects the insulin resistance, modify the lipids in the blood, and also it affects the insulin growth factor, a growth factor which is connected with insulin and its bioavailability. This cascade has an effect onto fundamental aspects for cancer. Apoptosis, it reduces the programmed cell death, which is necessary to kill or to make the mutated cells die. And it also favors angiogenesis, the creation of a network of blood vessels, capillaries, fueling the growth of the cancer. We went from the macro factor to the biological factor by studying the cascade of events. From this, we went from these factors, especially obesity and the lack of exercise. This has an important effect on the inflammatory state that Alberto Mantovani mentioned. And here we connect also with the research on risk factors. This is interleukins with TNF-A, or TNF-alpha, sorry, and the onset of tumor, because we have to realize that mutated clones are quite numerous in all of us, starting from a certain age, but we can live with mutant clones. If they are silent, we can live up to 100 years of age without developing cancer. Of course, we can die at 100, but we can wait. Well, even if the cancer would have become manifest at 120, we are happy to live until we are 100 years old. So this research enabled us to go from an hypothesis to the confirmation of that hypothesis and to the understanding of the biological mechanisms to issue recommendations which are not opinions but which are scientific, based on scientific evidences. So now to have a prevention of the colon cancer, it is much better to have this diet on the left-hand side with the consumption of fruit, vegetables, whole cereals, fiber, folates, vitamin B, vitamin D, and having high blood levels of vitamin D, exposure to the sun, or supplements, fish, calcium, and exercise. In red, it's red meat consumption, processed meat consumption, salami and others. This increases the risk level. And here we have abdominal obesity. 20 years ago, I would have said fruit, vegetables, and meat. I would have ignored the existence of what lies in between, and I would have ignored that. All this intervenes from a normal mucosa to polyps, to the growth of polyps, and to the transformation of polyps into cancer. And now, in the survival studies, this also intervenes in the development of metastasis. And we moved from the closed box to the open box and to the understanding of the different mechanisms. So having studied these factors, some time ago we got an idea. Why don't we study, under the aegis of EPIC, to what extent these factors, which are important for the development of cancer, to what extent these factors are predictors of longevity or early death. The premature mortality is being studied. Well, premature mortality is a concept which varies from one country to another. But we decided, more or less, that premature mortality means dying between 50 and 70 years of age. Well, it's an artificial range, really. In other populations would mean dying before the age of 30. Why is it so important? Because that's the period during which mortality causes have been changed to a lesser extent. We have people who reach the age of 80, 90s, but in between the 50 and 70s, no significant change has been introduced. We took EPIC with 100,000 people, and we considered tobacco use, alcohol intake, BMI, diet, with a specific score, an algorithm which considers beneficial or detrimental foods, and then a physical activity index and blood pressure that we measured at the beginning of the study. We have three progressive slides here. The first one is trivial. Here you can see a slightly modeled function. We presume that one reaches 40 years of age, and then we study what is the probability to be dead or alive, let's say in positive terms, the probability to be alive after a certain number of years of follow-up. This is not a mathematical model, but it emerges that in men, the survival probability is rather low, much lower than in women. 85% in women is very high, 94%.
Questo lo sapevamo tutti, le donne
We all
vivono più
knew
che gli
that
uomini.
women live longer than men.
Poi abbiamo diviso per fumatori e non fumatori e già
Then
le
we
cose
broke
cambiano un
it down
pochino, perché
in
come
smokers
vedete,
and
se uno
non-smokers, and you can see that
separa
things changed a little.
i non smoker,
If
che sono
you
in verde,
divide the
già gli uomini
non-smokers
sono
from the
un
others,
pochino
then
più
you see
simili
that
alle donne,
men
cioè gli
become
uomini che
more
non
similar
fumano
to women.
hanno circa
Non-smoking men
92%
have
probabilità di
almost
vivere a 70 anni,
92%
le donne
probability
circa
to be
94.
alive at
Gli
70 years
uomini
of
che
age.
fumano hanno
And of course, in
82%, le
men
donne
who
che
smoke,
fumano
we have
86%.
82%.
Questa differenza fra uomini e donne che
Here,
fumano è perché
this
quando
difference
gli uomini
between
fumano,
men
fumano
and
più che
women
le
is
donne.
that when men smoke,
Molto di più che le donne.
smoke
Quindi
more than
è
women, much
legato
more
alle
than
donne.
women, so this
La
is
grande sorpresa,
connected
alla
to the
quale noi
quantity.
quasi non credevamo,
But a great
abbiamo
surprise,
rianalizzato
we
questi
didn't
dati per
believe
un anno,
to our
torturandoli
eyes,
più
and we
possibile,
really
è
tortured
che se
our
noi combiniamo il non
patients.
fumare
So if we
con
combine
il fatto
non-smoker,
di avere una
healthy
dieta sana,
non-smoker,
equilibrata,
and with the
di
fact of having a
consumare
well-balanced
1 o 2
diet,
bicchieri di vino al giorno, ma non di
and
più,
consuming 1 or 2
di
glasses
avere
of
una
wine per
attività
day
fisica
and not
moderata
more,
quotidiana,
with a
di
moderate
avere
daily
un indice di massa
exercise
corporale
and
normale,
a
cioè i
BMI,
testi snelli e la pressione normale,
a lean BMI and a normal
la
blood
probabilità di
pressure,
essere vivo
then the
a 70
possibility of
anni
being still alive
è
at 70 years of age
98% delle donne,
is equal to
98%
98% of the women,
circa negli uomini.
97% in
Scompare
men.
completamente la
And
differenza uomini e donne. Le
there is
donne
no
non
difference
è che vivono di
between
più
men
degli
and
uomini
women.
perché
It is
sono
not so much that
biologicamente
women live more
favorite,
than
perché sono
men
più
just because
sveglie, più
they're
intelligenti e
favored, but just
ragionevoli degli
because
uomini, che sono
they are
più
more
stupidi.
reasonable and more intelligent than men. Men are, a little bit dumb. Women are smarter.
E gli uomini quando fanno le cose male le fanno
And
proprio
when
male.
men
Vedete
get
che
it wrong, they
chi
really
fuma
get it
ed ha
wrong,
una vita
because those who
fa
smoke,
tutto sbagliato, no?
they
Ha una
they do
dieta
it all wrong.
sballata,
They have the
beve
diet, a bad
troppo,
diet. They drink
passa
too
il tempo
much.
seduto,
They do
è
not
obeso,
exercise.
è
They are
iperteso,
obese and with high blood
solo
pressure. So they
60%
really get
probabilità
it
di
all
essere
wrong,
vivo
and they have
a
60%
70
of probability to be still
rispetto a
alive at
98%.
70, as compared to 98% of women.
Se c'è un messaggio forte, noi avevamo
A strong message is that we had highly underrated the importance of these factors when we determined longevity. It is reassuring because just a few years ago, with my colleague Nadide Judge, speaking about big data, we performed an analysis of the World Health Organization with 55 millions of deaths per year. So every year we have 55 millions of deaths, and we analyzed the causes of the deaths. And we started the prevalence of the risk factors for each of the countries where we have the mortality data. And we estimated that 36 out of 55 millions were attributable to modifiable risk factors. For example, one dies of heart infarction because he is too heavy, because he's obese, he doesn't exercise, he has a bad diet. So here we have the causes which are the main killer. First of all, we have high blood pressure. Blue and red. In red, we have the developing countries, low to medium income countries. In blue, we have high income countries. As you may see, in the low-medium countries, we have the disaster of hypertension. Asia and Latin America, where high blood pressure is very high, high prevalence, badly treated, and tobacco. We have been very successful. The company exporting tobaccos are very successful, and they have moved the death market to other parts of the world. High blood glucose, which are connected to colon cancer, and what I said, the dysregulation of the consumption of sugar and physical inactivity, low and medium income countries. Again, obesity, high cholesterol, alcohol intake, and low fruit and vegetable intake. So with this, and with the analysis of the 55 million deaths per year, an analysis which has been carried out independently. This has given us matching results. And is there any hope? Yes, there is hope ahead, because the tobacco experience is telling us that we can change the world. This is the mortality for lung cancer from 1950 to 2010. It started to increase. It seems it would continue to increase forever. Now something changed here. These are men. They started to quit smoking, especially in the middle-aged men, and we immediately had a decrease in lung cancer deaths. In Hungary, things are not going well because a recent change in the government has has reintroduced smoking everywhere. And here we have women on the right-hand side. We have an increase in lung cancer in incidence in the UK. For example, the incidence of lung cancer will be higher in women than in men in 3 years' time. So now we can close on dreams. The dream, my dream, someone like me who has been researching cancer for more than 35 years, my dream is that in 20 years' time, we may succeed in having the same pride and successful that our cardiologist colleagues have, who have reduced cardiovascular deaths from very high levels in the 50s and 60s to 1/4 to what it used to be, by combining a certain number of prevention measures on causes, and this allowed them to reduce the mortality rate both in men and women. The reason why we live longer is only and exclusively connected to this. Once we overcome child mortality, the fact that there is an aging of the population because there is a decrease in cardiovascular deaths, whereas mortality connected to cancer has remained the same and covers 80% of the deaths. We hope that in 15, 20 years' time, someone in this room will say, we have succeeded in reducing cancer mortality as well. Thank you.